Welcome, folks. Welcome to Opening Doors. Thanks for joining us. Oh, this has been a rough week for folk music here in New England. We lost one of the really great writers in our community and a very good friend of mine, Scott Alaric. This past week, we just learned about it yesterday, and I saw just before we came on that we've lost Bill Staines today as well. Two of the really great keepers of the flame. They would be very at home in the conversation that we'll be having tonight, based in roots music and the power of that music to tell stories. I couldn't be happier to have the guests that we have on today. They're from the other side of the country, but they're deeply steeped in the same kinds of music that I love. They're also deeply steeped in the work of anti-racism, and we're going to be learning from them tonight. I'm joined by Briar and Joe Seamons, who are musicians and a couple, but are also leaders of a project called the Rhapsody Project, based in Seattle, up there in the Pacific Northwest. So let me bring Joe and Briar in.
Hello.
Oh, let me put my headphones on, then I can actually hear you.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us, and sorry to be sharing tough news tonight. Did you guys know, have interaction with Bill or Scott Alaric in your travels out there out the West?
We didn't happen to, no.
I don't travel much anyway.
Yeah, you guys are out there on that side.
Yeah.
Well, Scott was the writer for a folk writer for the Boston Globe for many, many years, and really the guy who gave me my start, but so many other people too. And he wrote a book called Deep Roots about the folk community. You guys are involved deeply in roots music out there too. I'd love to have you start us off with a song. Maybe you could show us a little bit about what you're doing out there, and then we'll dig into some conversation about what community out in Seattle looks like.
Would love to.
Great.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Here's a song about a little town in Mississippi.
So strange. He's like, yeah, I know. Oh, Mississippi, my heart cries out for you in sadness. I wish to linger where the wintry winds don't blow. Down where the southern moon swings low, that's where I wanna go. I'm going to miss Tishomingo because I'm sad today. I wish to linger way down old Dixie Way. How my weary heart cries out in pain. Oh, how I wish that I was back again with a raise in a place where they make you welcome all the time. Way down the Mississippi among those cypress trees. Making you tipsy with this strange melody. To resist temptation, honey, I just can't refuse. In Tishomingo, I wanna live gonna teach a finger because I'm sad today. Ah, honey, I wish to linger way down old Dixie Way. My weary heart cries out in vain. How I wish that I could get back again with the race in a place where they make you welcome all the time, way down the Mississippi on those cypress trees. They get you tipsy with their strange melodies to resist temptation. Honey, I just can't refuse. And Tishomingo, I wanna linger where they play those weary blues.
Woo! You guys sound great. Who originated that song?
Boy, that's I mean,
Oof.
that's
That's
a composer from the late 19 teens.
yes.
The composer is escaping me right now, but we got it from Bunk Johnson's version. I mean, it's a common tune in what they call with New Orleans jazz bands.
Yeah, it's like a.
But I believe it's
7 or 8 minute song. The version that we got, it's like this really long version. And like wedged, in the middle of it is the vocal part, because usually, and then a lot of people who do that song, they just play the instrumental.
Uh-huh.
And it's beautiful and awesome. But then I heard this version, and that little vocal part was in there, and I was like, "Oh, that's for me."
Yeah.
Is it Spencer Williams?
Yeah, I think it's Spencer Williams, but I wanna double check
Joe's checking
because I haven't looked in too long. And I should
Yeah.
know.
I think it might.
I'm cheating online here too, and I'll give my acknowledgement. I was picking a little Reverend Gary Davis, Candyman at the beginning there.
Oh.
Yep.
Welcome, guys. Welcome, and sorry to sort of throw you into our local maelstrom here. It's been a rough week, and this is part of folk heritage. Is I think we're very intergenerational communities, which is one of the things that's special about the folk music process and community. Part of that process is learning from elders, and then of course elders pass on, and then we're there to hold the flames ourselves.
So true.
Tell me a little bit about your background. How did you guys get into music, and how did you meet?
Well, I've been singing for my whole life, like a lot of singers. And we met because one summer I was working at down in Port Townsend, Washington, which is right near where I grew up in Chimacum, Washington. And, small town, neither here nor there. But I had like these 3 different jobs. I was working in one called Piccadilly Bob's, and it was awesome. It was a paint shop, as well as, an odds and ends. And like the whole thing was that she was selling clay, chalk, and mineral-based paint. The spiel is like still in there about like why that's better and how it's really fun and all of these different techniques about it. And I was singing, and
You were singing.
I was singing along to the radio, and one of the women that I work with was like, "You need to go to the Port Townsend Acoustic Blues Festival," which is like one of many festivals that's thrown at Fort Worden through Centrum, but also not through Centrum, just at the fort, which is like, an old military base. And I had never heard of it. I grew up like 15 minutes away from this place, and I never heard of it. And they've been doing this festival for 30 years or something. Mm-hmm. And so I was going to go, and then I wasn't going to go because it's expensive. I was working 3 jobs, like to pay rent and eat. So I couldn't. And she and my boss, it's like all got together, and they were like, "Well, we already paid for it, so you're going." And that's where I met Joe. It was.
You guys met at the festival.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
So, and that was kind of your first big outing, Briar, huh?
Yeah, it was. And I was there as a student, just like she had given me this little ukulele, which I'm so happy about because now I know how to actually play the darn thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I met a bunch of musicians that were local and not local. And when I met Joe and learned that he was local for lots of reasons, I started going to his and Ben's concert, his band partner. And then that kind of opened me up to a bunch of other musicians who were also local. And that kind of started me actually performing outside high school and all that.
And that's Ben Hunter. That
Yes.
is so Joe, you and Ben perform a lot. Has that been your kind of mainstay performance act for a long time?
Yeah, at the time that I met Briar, it had just kind of become my main gig. I had a series of bands, or I had a couple of bands down in Portland, and in the late aughts, early teens of this last decade, and then I met Ben through at another music festival down at String Summit outside of Portland, and Ben started joining my band, and then Ben and I got actually also at the Port Townsend Festival got super obsessed with that scene, the same era of music that Briar and I cover, and so we went all the way down the rabbit hole and started learning as much of that music as we could.
Started calling themselves songsters.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Said we're songsters, and started just gigging everywhere we possibly could doing that music, and that was probably 7-8 years ago that really started becoming my main source of income, as opposed to my previous bands and teaching gigs down in Portland. So that's where I met Ben.
Okay. And I want to come back to some of that and your roots as a guitar player and how you got into some of this music. But the way I know you guys is through your organization, the Rhapsody Project. I first saw you, Joe, a mutual friend, Andy Ferguson, who goes by Red Yarn in the family music world, has a great act, and told me Andy and I have been involved in some anti-racist work together in the family music space, and he told me some about the Rhapsody Project and your online class that you helped teach called Face the Music. And then I saw you at Folk Alliance interview Dom Flemons from the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And I was fascinated by your conversation, the way you guys engaged on race, but in a very specific talking through American roots music history. And it made me interested in the class, which I've just finished taking with you, and it was great. Highly recommended to other folks. Let's see, I'll put up a banner. So this is the Rhapsody Project, and somewhere here. Well, if you go, well, maybe not. If you go to the Rhapsody Project, under their programs, you'll see Face the Music. So tell us a little bit about that class, and then we'll work backwards. How about that?
Okay.
Sure, yeah. Well, you started it.
So the Face the Music class came out of traveling around with Briar and with Ben and with other amazing, culture bearers of Black American musical tradition, and being welcomed into that space for a number of years and learning a lot just by a lot of hours in the car and in watching my friends who are Black just get all kinds of awkward flack from awkward white people that don't know how to be around Black people because, like me, they grew up or they lived largely in socially segregated spaces that they don't have experience being around other people of color, and so
well, they have it with things their parents tell them.
Right. And so, and thanks to the music, and thanks to my friendships, and thanks to and another project that maybe we can talk about later, Black and Tan Hall, I had done some work like white caucusing and just done a lot of reading and just become fascinated by the fact that, wow, if you really understand the depth and breadth of Black influence on American music, and also American culture, and you understand the degree to which American culture, as we describe it and as it exists, is really unimaginable without the influence of Black people, even though, I think it's only, less than 15% of our population is black folks. When you start to understand all that, then you have a much deeper appreciation for why and how racism functions. And so that I wanted to pass on that understanding. And I had the idea for this class, and then the pandemic gave space for us to, for me to really develop it. And my mother created the image that's on screen now. She's an artist in Oregon where I grew up. And so, I said, Briar and I at the beginning of the pandemic moved back to Oregon, because it was hard to pay rent in Seattle when you didn't, all the gigs went away.
The pandemic happened, and not just our music gigs, but our teaching gigs. Like, we're gig workers, and I was also going to school, and we all know, life was canceled.
It all went poof.
So we had to move to Oregon
and pivot. And so I started. Yeah. I was like, well, this is the time. Everybody's on Zoom. I can do this. I can finally do this class I've been thinking about. And so in the summer of 2020. Even before George Floyd was murdered, I just sent an email to 120 of my friends and said, hey, I want to do this thing. Would you be interested in just hopping on Zoom once a week for 8 weeks and going through this kind of curriculum I've developed? And so that was the start of Face the Music.
With the help of his trusty wife.
Well, yeah, you should just assume that everything that I tell you about was done.
Oh, I did. I definitely assumed that. And so the framework of the class is there's kind of a theme for each week. It's 8 weeks and meeting for an hour and a half. The first class was around the history of minstrelsy and blackface, and it focused on a performer called Bert Williams, who I was not familiar with, and hearing you and Dom talk about Bert and that history was one of the things that drew me to the class. Because, as somebody steeped in this music, I feel like I've learned a lot, and we're constantly learning new things. But here was a performer that was completely new to me. This was a black musician who performed in blackface and I learned through your class and through some of the resources that you send out, was one of the most famous entertainers in our country at the time, and one of the best paid, which is fascinating. He was from the West Indies originally.
His folks were West Indian and raised him in Sacramento, actually. So he grew up. He's first gen, but really grew up in a West Indian household, and it has like some of our students in Rhapsody Project, has the experience of being the first generation who's raised in America.
Trying to reconcile that.
Yeah, and felt that
Right.
he was outside of the black experience as anybody, as he was from the Irish experience, because
Right.
Classified as a black person, he thought of himself as West Indian.
Right. And so that was a focal point for that class. And there's so many layers there. Here's somebody who considers themselves an outsider who comes to America and is thrown into America's definition of what race is here in this country. You're black because the law says you're black and our culture says you're black.
We're not interested to give you any more complex identity than that.
Yeah.
You're West Indian. Oh, we don't care. You're black.
Right. You're black. And so chooses to perform, as a very talented musician, chooses to perform in blackface because that is the sort of the currency of the time, is wildly successful in it. And in that, and as we look at, then there's actually some video from the time, some film, you can see how complicated that relationship is. Here is sort of a version of clowning, which was the underpinning of what minstrelsy was, and yet there was this real pathos there. He was obviously able to connect to the black experience in a very different way than white minstrelsy, and so he sort of turned the thing inside out and on its head. Whether or not the audience at the time knew it, he knew what he was doing. I guess holding that mirror up, it just, more than what it says about Bert Williams is how it reflects how America's torturous relationship with race was and continues to be. And it's a fascinating lens, I think, for looking at racism, the history of racism, you know, I know there are a lot of white folks who've become very interested in the last couple of years, and sort of diving in. And there's a lot of texts, and it can be overwhelming. For me as a musician, having an outlet, you know, even all the reading that I've done and the conversations, looking at racism through the lens of music. And then the course takes you through many iterations of the way white and black musicians interact and the way the industry operates, and it's a fascinating lens. So you came up with that curriculum. Was Ben involved with that too, or Ben was involved with setting up the Rhapsody Project itself?
Ben was involved in setting up the Rhapsody Project itself. When I was developing the curriculum, Ben was like, hey, Joe, so you're just going to kind of hang out a shingle and say you do this thing, like you better be darn sure that you know what you're doing. And so he gave me positive input in terms of like encouragement to like be careful, you know, because you know, I mean, the funny thing is, like, I did a lot of research, you know, and this is something that everybody should think about as they go on their journey. There's a lot of people, like myself included, out there saying like, we do DEI work, we do anti-racism work, you know, and there's no established board or, you know, qualifying like thing you go through. People just hang out a shingle and say, this is what I do. Right. And some of that work is really great and powerful, and probably some of it is merely performative, and some of it might actually be harmful. You know, it's not all, it's a mixed bag. And so that was the input that Ben gave, and the input that Briar gave was more in the form of like,
he wanted to make an acronym out of the word march, in order to give the class a backbone, which is
of values.
Of values and of things like, and March was it because, you know, the pandemic had just happened, but then also there was the huge Black Lives Matter movements and all of the marches all over the place. And it was just like one of these words, I think, that was just like flashing neon in his head. And so we came up with
the March framework.
And the first one is movement for so many reasons, because of what was going on, but also because it kind of, you know, sets it up well, like the whole rest of the acronym, because marching is a movement.
Yeah.
It could be a movement of your body. It could be a movement of people.
Right. What are the rest of the words? What does it stand for all the way through?
So we've got movement, acknowledgement, renewal, collaboration, and heritage.
Okay.
So with the class, right? So it's 8 weeks. And so basically it's like you do movement twice, right? And then acknowledgement 2 weeks in a row. And
but
like,
the themes keep recurring.
The themes keep recurring, and then when taught in the class, they're not necessarily in that order. It just always starts on movement.
For me, the movement piece was one of the most interesting and one of the most difficult for me. And I think, speaking on behalf of white men everywhere,
Good.
and this was a conversation that in the class, right? Moving one's body. And Briar, I noticed when you perform, you are very physical, and it's so central to the way you perform. And I think it's something that many musicians like myself, we often don't think about. We're in this position a lot, sitting down, you know. Right. Yeah, so talk a little bit. We actually had some dancers in the class with us who talked a lot about and brought a lot of attention to the way we move our bodies and the way that is actually wrapped up in white and black culture and in the history of racism. So I'd love to hear your perspective, Briar, on that.
Well, I am a singer first, right? So I play the ukulele, but like singing means that I was always standing while performing. So and when I was a kid, I've got 3 sisters, and when I was a kid, my mom only had enough money for one of us to play an instrument. And so of course it was the oldest, right? Because she's oldest and she got there first. So she played the clarinet.
Which wasn't you, I take it.
Wasn't me? No, I'm the second oldest.
Okay.
And so I was in choir, and that was for lots of reasons, but so when you're in choir, you're standing the whole time, and then when I got into middle school, and I also grew up in the church, so that was a big part of it too. And like the movement piece has a lot to do with growing up in the church, because as a choral person, like somebody in a chorus, you're standing straight, you're like this, and you're like focusing all your energy on just making a sound with the rest of the people around you. And so it's very
stillness.
It's very still in church. And I was taught that singing is not about me and it's not for me. I am here to glorify the Lord, and I'm here to be a vessel, and I'm here to be a channel to let the Spirit move through you. And so there isn't any rigidity to that. There's no, in the church that I grew up in, right? So there's no reason to stand still, because if the Spirit's moving through you, you can't stand still. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So
what were the demographics of your town and the church that you grew up in?
Well, I grew up in a really, really small white town, and there's probably in Chimacum 4 or 5 families that had Black children. Some of them were adopted from Ethiopia, and some of them were, transplants. But the people who ran my church, and my father and some of my sisters are Black. And so they came up from the South. I don't know, because I stopped going to that church when I was about 13 or 14 years old because of some stuff. But so I never really remembered exactly where they came from in the South. But they the woman who taught me most of what I know about being an expressive and soulful singer is Miss Carol, and that was Pastor Brown's wife.
Okay.
Her church had Pastor Brown and Pastor White
At the very beginning. And Pastor Brown, I remember turning to my mom and saying, "Mom, Pastor Brown is brown and Pastor White is white." And we were like outside the church, and I remember her smacking me and being, "Shut up." That was like very early on. Later on, something happened there. We used to go to the Grange for church, and then we started a church in Fort Townsend, and it was like our churches kind of split up after that. And then in high school, I joined the drama club.
Yeah.
So that's
more movement.
And I did it because, of course, I wanted to be in musicals, but then that also means I had choreographed movements to the songs I was singing. So a lot of me being physical as a singer is one to do with learning from Miss Carol, mostly to do with learning from Miss Carol, but then putting some playfulness into it came from being in drama.
A love of the theater.
And then also, I don't think it was ever really natural to me to be very rigid. It's harder for me to stand still. When I first started performing, of course, nobody was really looking at me, because I always sang the national anthem for functions. And they have you way up in the back next to the booth where the sound guy is. So I've just always kind of been a physical singer.
Yeah.
It's a physical thing. It just doesn't make sense to me.
And you're also a dancer.
Yes.
You also dance.
I also dance.
Yeah. Which comes through. Yeah. If you guys are willing, I'd love to hear another song, and then we'll dig back in and talk a little bit more about Rhapsody as we go, if that's all right with you all.
Yeah.
That's just wonderful.
Great.
Let's see.
Would you like to do that Elizabeth Cotton song, or do you have another one in mind?
Let's do that one tends to drag a bit.
You want to do some blues? You want to do Maxville Blues?
You want to do an original?
Yeah.
All right. Came from Arkansas to Oregon, pulling that old green chain. Came from Arkansas to Oregon, pulling that old green chain. Looks like when I left the South, old Jim Crow, he jumped the train. I hopped the nation. I'm living through the hate you breathe. Go ahead and sharpen your tongue. I worry about sharpening my saw. Go ahead and sharpen your tongue. I worry about sharpening my saw. 'Cause when that judgment comes by fire, oh, I tell you that's all, that's all. Trumpets ring. That choir up all night, I'ma hear their voices sing. Never to chop another pie, or to saw another ring. They simply cannot last. Yes, these Maxville blues, they simply cannot last. 'Cause when I bow my head, I see the future through the past.
Beautiful. So that's an original?
Yes, yes. So that was written for Gwendolyn Trice, who runs the Maxville Heritage Foundation out of Maxville, Oregon, but
Joseph, Oregon.
Okay.
The Heritage Interpretive Center, which is
thank you.
her father was a black logger in the multi-ethnic logging shop out
She
there.
didn't know about till she was like in her 30s or something.
Yeah, he founded a museum to tell the story of. There was a few of these multi-ethnic camps in Oregon. This is at a time when Oregon was actually, as Oregon was incorporated as a state, they outlawed. They said, well, it'd be easier to just not have slavery, but let's also just not have any black people. And so they put that on the books in the Oregon State Constitution.
And if you lived in Oregon as a black person, you had to, by law, go in every 6 months and get whipped.
Yep. That was the law that they didn't take off the books until the late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time that Gwen's father moved out to Maxville, he was living in defiance of that law. And so she founded this incredible small museum in Joseph, Oregon, which is just, maybe 30 miles from the original town site. And and now a decade later, she has, through her gumption, genius, and ingenuity, and the work of her board, we have raised the money, and she is about to purchase the entire town site and establish an archaeological easement, outdoor school, and interpretive, spot, owned and directed by people of color, by black folks, to celebrate the story. So.
Wow, that is amazing. Much of your background in the work that you're doing is so similar, but I'm curious, here's a question. What feels unique to you guys about the region that you guys are in the Pacific Northwest? You just spoke to some of it, but what is the flavor of the work that you're involved with there? What resistance do you meet? We see on national television, during Black Lives Matter protests, you guys were kind of in the center of the storm. out there. A lot of national attention was turned. I'm curious what you feel like the local flavor politically and musically is that's specific to this region.
Well,
Help us understand over here in New England.
Yeah.
So we lived in Mist, Oregon, which is actually an hour outside of Portland, towards the coast. And I can say with all honesty that it was terrifying to live there because it's a very small little white town. And even though I grew up in one of those, it wasn't mine. Like, those people don't know who I am. And so it was actually quite terrifying to be there because it's severely red. It's a huge influx of people with Trump flags and don't tread on me. And the Confederate flag was flying around all over the place. There's actually really close to where his parents live, like literally right around the corner.
This is Eastern Oregon?
Western.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Closer to the coast.
Closer to the coast. Yeah. It's
interesting.
Equidistant between the Oregon coast, like Astoria, Oregon, and Portland. About 40 miles between the two.
Yeah.
From each between the two.
So it was just kind of a terrifying place to live. And like, there's a reason why I stay on his parents' property when we're there, or I stay on our property when we're there, because I'm not trying to be on somebody else's property. Yeah. I'm not in the community there. That's what it felt like while living there. I don't know what it felt like growing up there. But in Chimacum, I bet it was pretty similar.
And Chimacum is up on the peninsula in Washington.
So yeah, so Chimacum and Mist, where we were, are like 4 hours away from each other.
Yeah.
And it's closer to, it's also, it's also kind of close to the coast. Like, you could get there in 2.5 hours or something, but it's not as close to the coast as where we were living.
But to speak to Alex's question, like, I would say the Northwest is, so I mean, like say Texas, right? They say Austin is like a blue dot in the center of Texas, right? So in one sense, Portland and Seattle are blue dots in what are otherwise fairly red states. But the Northwest, there's the assumptions people make, like, well, it's the North, so it's more liberal. Not really true. It's just like the flavor of racism is different there. I would say that the whiteness that you see in, it's like liberals think that they're liberal, but really they just aren't in touch with the fact that, well, you do exhibit racist behaviors. They're just not the kind of racist behaviors that you associate with the South. And so you're willing, or so like you don't know about them, or you.
In the South, I doubt that somebody would come up to you in the grocery store and say, "Hey, can I bounce your curls?" In the North, people just come up to you in the fucking grocery store, excuse my language, and like touch your hair. Who does that?
Yeah. So I think the social segregation is more intense than it is in the South. And as a result, as I said earlier, right, white folks just aren't used to being around people of color. That's a big factor. And also the white folks who think that they're liberal don't. Again, partially because of that, they are not good at being in integrated spaces.
They have white savior complexes.
Yeah,
right.
White savior complexes. So that's
all of which is very familiar to us over here too. And living in another liberal state, more and more, the sense I have is like, this series is really aimed at white liberals. I mean, that most of the DEI work that I'm involved in, I think the work that you guys are involved with, at least with the Face the Music project, that's sort of the audience here, right? Is like, there needs to be a threshold of who's willing to come to the table and have a conversation. But the number
to be made, yeah.
Right.
And also what's helpful with this, right, is that it's aimed at white liberals so that they can be better advocates. Because a lot of the problem is people talk about wanting to be an advocate for Black people, but then when it comes to putting your job on the line, when it comes to putting your livelihood and your family on the line, you have the privilege of not doing that.
Right.
So instead of staying silent, staying in the back seat and not doing anything about it, put yourself out there and risk your job and your livelihood and your family, like we have to do when we walk out of the door, because we don't have a choice.
Right. And this is a theme throughout this series. In a lot of these conversations, it's come up is, this idea of allyship versus collective liberation or collective advocacy. The thing that I feel like I've internalized the most in the last couple of years is the sense that if you're doing stuff for other people, it will peter out. you have to be doing it for yourself. And what that requires of white folks is to understand the toxicity of racism in our own bodies. We chose to call this series Opening Doors, but I think of it often as untying knots, or that's the process that I find myself engaged in, untying knots inside ourselves because there's so many of them, like a massage therapist looking for those, like, where are the tough places? And those are the places that we tend to want to take our hands off because it hurts. But those are the places that we kind of need to dig our fingers in. But we do it for ourselves. Ultimately, white folks have to be addressing racism for their own benefit, for it to be a lasting endeavor, I think. There has to be a sense that, like, if you're involved in this, it's because you need to progress for yourself. That's the way I think anti-racism can become a lifelong commitment and endeavor. As long as you think of it as altruism or allyship, that you're doing something on somebody else's behalf, you'll get exhausted and you'll turn off and you'll get distracted by other things.
And you also won't be effective if you don't work on yourself.
Yeah, it's so much of it's internal, right?
Also means taking constructive, like, criticism, and sometimes it's not going to be nice. Black people are just going to tell you straight to just shut up. This isn't for you. And a lot of the times what we see is people trying to, like, argue their way out of that. No, if somebody specifically has said to you, stop, then it would be very helpful if you, like, took that advice. Even as an advocate, that's part of the job too, right? Mm-hmm. It's like taking things that you don't want to hear and putting those things into action.
Yeah, and being willing to be wrong, that's a big one. It's another thing that us white guys struggle with, Joe.
We do.
And being aware of the amount of space that we take up. This question's for you, Joe, is as somebody who, clearly you were drawn to Black music from an early age, this is what you're doing, and now you're steeped deeply in the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and helping other white folks figure this stuff out. How do you walk that path as a white guy? How do you maintain awareness of the space you're taking up? How do you balance the idea that you're doing stuff for a career, and also that you have a ethical commitment to play? How do you walk those lines?
Well, I first of all endeavor to stay humble, because it's not like you said, it's not a journey that ends. It's not like that's my quibble with the term woke, right? It's like woke implies that you're all the way done. You're awake. You're there. And it's like, no, not with racism in America. You still got stuff to do now on yourself, and whatever my successes are, whatever my achievements are in this space, I always got more to do. So it starts with that, and then it goes to continuing. I mean, and so with that humbleness, it's also like whether it be I'm lucky to be married to a Black woman, but I listen to Black and Indigenous women to start with, because basically Black women go through life and have to be 3 times as good just to get a fair shake. And so I just try to learn from them. So, like, one of the things I try to point out to my students is like understand that Black women are constantly having to gauge how angry or passionate they can seem, because if they're the angry Black woman, all of a sudden they're shut off and their opportunity is stymied. So if I'm trying to convince someone who is exhibiting racist behavior that they're being racist, it's not going to work for me to go at them angry or to bring my emotions into the equation, right? I have to take a lesson from Black women who are constantly navigating this, like, I can't get emotional, because if I get emotional, I'm not going to be effective. And so I try to learn those lessons and live those lessons, and just always keep learning is the biggest one. And then I also always just, because we're living in capitalism, because we're living in America, you go back to the money. People want to say they're doing equity. It's like, cool, show me the line in your budget that you're dedicated to equity, and how are you spending that money that you're allocating to equity? What does that look like?
Right.
Those organizations fall flat on that particular piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
right.
Talking the talk versus walking the walk when you're living in capitalism.
Having spent a lot of time with you on this class, Joe, I can see the humility and that desire to continue to learn. And it does, that strikes me as the clear, authentic strand that is required in the work. The moment you become certain is the moment that you've stopped paying attention.
And the other thing I would like to add is that diversity is not just in terms of your ethnicity. It is in terms of, I mean, age is a big one, right? Like the Rhapsody Project is successful because we have, our students are in these other rooms right here. We have amazing young folks of all ethnicities that we hang out with. And then we have Lady A, who, and elders like that come through, people who come to Port Townsend, people that come to the festivals where we bring our students.
People who donate to support and like with money, but also with their time. Right.
And then we give the young people in our program, it's like, hey, like young interns, like here's our budget. Like, is this, what are we not thinking of, right? Because the kids are all right? They, in a lot of ways, they're ahead of us because just like they're digital natives, they've grown up with this stuff. They're advanced to a degree that we aren't. So if we're not listening to the youth when we're trying to create our budget, when we're trying
not just our budget,
write our equity statements, when we're not trying
our curriculums,
our policies,
the something we're trying to do with Rhapsody, which is actually pretty hard to do if you're trying to like move forward, is turn into a circular structure. Like there's not a hierarchy within the organization, or we're trying to not. I mean, there is some hierarchies, right? Because if Joe wasn't writing grants, we wouldn't be to where we are right now. And not everybody can write a grant. You know what I mean? You could, but
also like and also like we have. So like I have a lot of initiative, and I take a lot of initiative doing the work. But then also like if I'm making a major decision about what Rhapsody's doing, then I have 4 fellow leaders, all of whom are Black folks, who like I go to them and I say like, hey, like here's this kind of like major thing we have to consider. Like, what do we do here, right? So like the way I walk the walk is like I don't just make decisions and go do stuff without consulting my fellow leaders. And my goal is to keep the organization. The leadership is going to be majority POC, and that's who calls the shots, right? Any people of any ethnicity can implement those decisions, but those decisions need to be made on the highest level by the people who reflect the communities that we aim to serve.
Right.
So
yeah, I want to circle back around in a little bit after we do some more music to talk some about the structure of Rhapsody, how you guys have built it, how you help run it, Joe, and keep that awareness in yourself. It's something I've been thinking about a lot with a couple of organizations that I'm involved in, including our local Melrose Racial Justice Community Coalition, which is nowhere close to the level of what you guys have built out there. This is a small town organization, but in a very white town, we've worked very hard to create an interracial group that really represents voices. And yet, as one of the co-founders of the group, right now I find myself in the position of I'm often the guy with the most bandwidth to do the organizing, to do the scheduling the meeting, to send out the post. And I found myself very locked up for a long time, sort of waiting for somebody to say, yeah, it's okay, you can send that thing, or tell me what to do. And learning to become comfortable with the idea that at some point, if something's not going to get done because nobody else is there to do it, you have to be willing to step into that space, but trying to constantly bring that humility with you of, if this came out in a wrong way, or if we need to backtrack, constantly asking questions, getting as much input as you can. I think these things aren't easy, and that's important to understand too, is if it was simple, people would do it all the time. When you endeavor in this kind of work, it's going to be complex. I'm gonna give you guys a break, let you grab some water or whatever you need to do, and I'll play a song, and then we'll come back and talk to you guys. All right. Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to play a song of mine, thinking about death and also about humor. I say this is a song of mine, but this is something I want to talk with these guys about when I come back, in that I wrote it, but this is a song that is completely steeped in the music of Black heritage, in its approach and its style and its fingerpicking. And I want to talk some about what you do with songs like these when we write them as white artists. It's one thing to cover a song and think about, paying tribute to who wrote that song. But even when you write original songs and yet you're steeped in a tradition that is outside of your own, how do you deal with that? So we'll get to that after I play you my little appropriation song. This is it's called Graveyard. Down in the old graveyard, I guess that's where I'll be. Someday, I don't know when, but it's got to catch up with me. You can save your money, save your soul. Eventually, you got to pay the toll. Down in the old graveyard, I guess that's where I'll be. In the old graveyard, I guess that's where I'll go. Save a spot, pick my plot, and write on my headstone. Husband, father, rest in peace. Let this bastard get some sleep. Down in the old graveyard, I guess that's where I'll go. Even Shakespeare had to shake this mortal coil. Not even Prince could play his way out of the soil. Yeah. Graveyard, down about 6 feet deep. Dress me in my Sunday best and lay me down to sleep. Good night, Gracie, good night, Moon, good night, Irene. Lord, make some room. Down in the old graveyard, down about 6 feet deep. Yeah. Well, down in the old graveyard, I guess that's where I'll be. Someday, I don't know when, but it's got to catch up with me. You can ring the bell, grab your coat, blow your horn, that's all she wrote. Down in the old graveyard, I guess that's where I'll be.
All right.
Thanks, Alice. That was great.
Thanks, guys. All right, so you had an original song before, too. What do you do with a song that you write, but that's steeped in a tradition? How do you pay that forward, Joe, and how do you pay tribute on an original song? Are there monetary ways that, how do you think about this in and outside the Rhapsody Project?
Well, I think that the Maxville song came about because of a collection of letters that were published in a book, or how did that come along? We were going to write a song based off of letters that were from children who lived at the segregated logging camp, and so we were trying to like put the words from the stories into a song, and then it just kind of turned into, well, let's bring a train into this because people were coming from the south on trains up to the north to come work in this camp. And so it just sort of we tried to keep the feeling into it while bringing in some influences from the now, like The Hate You Bring, or is like the kind of a play on The Hate You Give, which is a book, a song, a movie, and while also like staying true to the blues tradition, which is, I think that's a 12-bar blues, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the standard for blues these days.
But are you asking about like how you deal with like performance rights and publishing and stuff like that also?
Well,
or can you like what?
It was a multifaceted question.
Yeah. Multifaceted. Well, it's all of that. I'm wondering how you think about how you play music in a tradition, in a culture, and keep your recognition out forward. Because this is something that, having been steeped in roots music and blues music like you for a long time, I don't think I gave it my full attention for years. I knew who I loved. I mean, I loved Mississippi John Hurt, but in what way was I benefiting his family or the legacy left behind? Or if you can't do it, then how else can you pay that forward? Specifically, I think I mentioned to you in one of the classes, I was just looking for it. Jeff Tweedy of Wilco wrote a really interesting article that I read this summer, making the case that white artists like himself, in particular very wealthy white artists that have had a great deal of success, whose music is largely built. I mean, I don't even think of Wilco specifically in a black tradition, but it very much is, right? There are bands that are even more obvious in that way. But he wrote this article calling out the case for reparations, and that we can sit and wait for things to happen, or we can be proactive about it. And he was calling out other musicians, Bruce Springsteen, and the whole array of American rock musicians. And I've been thinking about it as I watch some of this get back with the rest of America. It's a deeply complicated thing, right? Here's a bunch of poor boys from Liverpool who, when they started out, they weren't thinking appropriation. They were thinking, this is the music I love. But somewhere along the way, they went from being poor boys to ruling the world.
Yeah,
and
but the Beatles. I mean, I would take more issue with the Stones. I think of the Beatles as much more in the music hall. I mean, they have a song called "Year of Blues" on the White Album, right? There's a blues influence. Paul McCartney singing "Why Don't We Do It in the Road." That's a bluesy type of song. But the Beatles aren't. The Beatles aren't.
They actually, what they did was like take American music and then feed it back to us. Like, this is hello.
With the influence of the music hall tradition and some British traditions. And so I see what they did as very original. And were they influenced by American music? Of course, deeply. Did they cover some soul music from the 50s? Yeah, beautifully. And
they always acknowledged it. Like, they weren't like a lot of the musicians. Well,
I don't know if they always acknowledged it, but
not outwardly, I guess, in that sense, but they acknowledge that this music is a Black American art form first.
Yeah,
right.
They acknowledge it with their dollars as well as their.
That's the question. They clearly acknowledged it. How much they acknowledged it with their dollars, I don't know. I mean, they started their first world tour. They opened every show apparently with this Chuck Berry song. They made, whether or not they made money off of that particular song, they sold a lot of tickets with that song being obviously one of the strongest things in their set. Did Chuck ever see any of that money? I don't think so. And, it's a different time, and it's not about looking backwards, but I think the question is looking forwards. Is there a place for white artists to be putting financial interests as part of our conversation? It's not just talking. It's not just saying this is who wrote this song, but is there a way that you can be contributing?
Yeah, I mean, money is definitely one of the ways that we should acknowledge the outsized and beautiful, profound influence of Black culture on global culture, right? Because our blues music and its babies, rock and roll through hip hop, those things are not just American anymore. They're worldwide. So yeah, should there be monetary acknowledgement? Absolutely. Should that be the only acknowledgement? Absolutely not. What is the shape of that monetary acknowledgement? I mean, I definitely think that just Paul McCartney just cutting Chuck Berry's estate a check, or the Beatles, whatever financial behemoth that the bank of the Beatles should cut him a check. Yeah, definitely necessary but insufficient, right? The money is an issue, but the money without also actions to back it up, not just to this is a Chuck Berry song. Chuck Berry is awesome. That's good. But what about creating better conditions so that Chuck Berry's grandchildren aren't like being assaulted in the streets or risking assault by a police every time they walk in the streets. Like that is the thing, you know, that we risk as white people who like to talk about racism, is like, we love to talk about it, think about it, opine, but like taking action is a lot harder, is a lot more exhausting, is a lot more demanding.
And still, it's like, you know, American artists like Lady Antebellum, they're still, instead of paying tribute to or in money or in words, they're like stealing from Lady A, who's a very well-known artist here in Seattle and has been playing music for years. And last year, because Antebellum is problematic, they changed their name to Lady A. And now instead of
without someone just Googling it, apparently. I don't know.
No, they had to have Googled it.
Yeah.
Because they have a very well-paid publicist, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, like somebody who checked. And then instead of saying this is a problem, maybe we should pick a different name, they're steamrolling her.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, talk about this, go back and forth, and what should we do? We should change our actions first, because your money's not gonna make any difference if your actions and your words aren't backing them up. So.
Right. No, that's very clear, and the point's very well taken. I guess my thought on this is just that I think there are ways in which that we often don't consider. I hadn't considered for years, and as a not wealthy musician, I'm not in the position of the Stones, and neither are you. Yeah. So there are many other ways that we can do this, but I guess part of the point is, should anything be off the table? Like, are you willing to actually look at everything that where your money comes from, what your stream of income looks like? Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that I think any of us who have any sort of platform at all can do is amplify other musicians. And it's not just about saying, hey, look over here, this is actually income. When you can point income dollars towards folks of color who are making music, towards women who are making music, you're actually helping people's bottom line. You're actually helping reverse engineer a system that has benefited folks like me and you, Joe. I mean, it's recognizing that there was third base, the idea of achievement when you already had a leg up. It's not as much of an achievement as you may think. And right. I often find that missing in conversations with musicians. They can talk, as you say, we can talk a lot about what we'd like to see, but it often comes back to, I did all of this myself, which sounds an awful lot like, a Republican platform.
Yeah.
Did you do it all yourself?
He's born on third base and thinks he hit a triple.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this. We've sort of danced around it a little bit, the Rhapsody Project. So I'd love to know how you and Ben conceived of this project, what form it first took place, and what it looks like now. You're in a physical space right now, or one of various physical spaces that you guys are making use of, which is awesome. Just to be able to have a place to do things is a big deal. Yeah. So tell me how it started and how you got to where you are now.
I mean, it started by going.
Can we trade chairs?
Yeah, sure. It's the Rhapsody Project started. The problem is I'm tall and you're short.
Yeah, I know, but this one has a back.
The Rhapsody Project started by Ben and I saying, "Wow, wouldn't it be nice if students had the music education that we wish we had?" Because we got undergraduate degrees in music and put that music to work. But we Ben got a classical violin degree. I studied some classical music, but got my degree in English lit and a minor in music. And so we went through getting intervals, basic music theory. Why are we waiting until musicians are 18 to teach them this stuff? That's ridiculous. Okay, so it started there. And then also, we had a love of roots music. And so, of course, we were going to teach the music that we play. And so we were collaborating with a local middle school band teacher, orchestra teacher, Beth Fortune, who's remarkable in her own right, and had a really cool program called Senior Fiddlers. And so she tapped Ben to teach junior fiddlers, which is after school feeder class for senior fiddlers, which was at that time the only fiddle class in a public middle school in America, as far as we could find. And so we were teaching the students to get them ready for for Beth Fortune's class. Then we started realizing as we went to Port Townsend Blues Festival every year, oh, why are there no young Black people learning from some of the greatest living bearers of acoustic blues tradition? This is ridiculous. So
something that's really cool, sidebar, about something like the Port Townsend Acoustic Blues Festival, and alternatively the blues festival that Phil Wiggins hosts at
Augusta
Heritage Center. The teachers are actually people of color. So you're not learning the blues music from white people.
Right.
They're hiring Black people and
Right.
white people too, but like their emphasis is on this is Black culture, so that's who's going to teach it to you, which is I only wanted to tap because we take our students there, because a lot of our students are of color, and so
so it's like, I can teach the kids 12-bar blues, and I can teach them all about blues, but there are things that Briar and Ben and Lady A can convey about blues tradition that I'm just, my lived experience is never going to give me that authority, going to give me that dimension of it. So I'm perfectly, capable and, in my right mind to teach parts of blues. But if I think that I'm the only person they need to learn it from, then I'm deluding myself. Right. So it became about, well, let's make sure that we connect students with the amazing culture bearers, especially those in their own communities, but then also opportunities like when they're coming through town, and like, let's connect them. And so, I mean, there's a lot.
So when I came through, they had been doing this program in the school that he's talking about, Washington Middle School, for about a year.
That's here in Seattle.
What's that program called?
Well, it was called Junior Fiddlers.
Right.
Fiddle Club.
It became the start of the Rhapsody Project, is what he's getting to. And so when I started helping out with Rhapsody Project, it was just like in the very early development stages. They were just in this one school, and it turned into go into the Hillman City Collaboratory, which is a community center, and teaching a few of the students that were there. And then we started to take students to festivals that were closer by, like the Wintergrass Festival, which is
Northwest Folk,
and Northwest Folklife, and those are both local Seattle situations. And then
the students would perform there.
We started getting more and more like students. I mean, still like more and more. Like we have like a good 15 students that show up pretty regularly, and like 8 of them have been with us and Joe and Ben since they were in this middle school class. And so now like two of them are in college.
Right.
So it's just like amazing. So then it turned into like on the second year, we started taking them to overnight camps. And the first one was the Port Townsend Acoustic Blues Festival, because they have all of the infrastructure for like and paperwork and lodgings and food and all of the logistics already figured out. So the woman who was running it at the time, I think she still is, Mary Hiltz, and she was a really big help in like getting us like together.
And they got us 10 scholarships, so none of the students had to pay a dime, and we brought them out there, and they got to experience solid week with culture bearers from all over the country.
And then we started having all of that paperwork of our own, so that we could like cover our own asses for when we eventually did our own blues festival just last year.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Yes.
We brought the kids where we were living in Mist, Oregon, and had not just the students, but then that was them and their families.
It was so magical.
Yeah, it was amazing.
There's the multi-generational part of it. So how do you guys, it seems that you guys are able to really center diversity. I love this picture. I'm sorry, it's the only one I have.
We always forget to have fun with the Rhapsody Project, but otherwise it's pretty good.
I think this is the second year of
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's at Port Townsend.
Yeah.
The one on the right, and the one on the left is at the Wintergrass Festival.
All right. So you guys, you have put a focus on diversifying your staff, and clearly you've been able to do that. How do you maintain and target diversity in your students that you bring in with the young people? What are the structures in place, or is it word of mouth? How's that work?
A lot of word of mouth.
That's happened naturally. It's because the culture bearers, the students see themselves reflected in the people we bring to them, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like we bring in Lady A, and Lady A comes, and so guess what? Young Black women keep showing up. Why? Because we have amazing Black women who teach them how to sing and teach them their culture. So it's like, it's not, I'm there all the time, but I'm not the only one. I'm trying to like weave in as many different cultural influences and backgrounds as we can. So,
well, and full credit to Ben as well. Like he's very well known in the Seattle area. He now works for Northwest Folk Life. He's like the head of.
He's the artistic
director now, and he just got that job last year as well. But
Ben's a gifted teacher.
He's a very gifted teacher. He's really fun. He's really talented, and he knows a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it seems like the values that you're teaching they flow throughout the organization, and then it builds on itself. First, folks who are watching, and I know there are a lot of folks who are interested in delving in more deeply. Oftentimes, the starting place is, I want to be part of a multiracial group. I want to reflect diversity. But how do you get there in a way that feels authentic, or not that feels authentic, that is authentic? I mean, my experience, and I think the experience of a lot of folks, white liberals that have sort of jumped on this idea, I'm going to seek diversity, is, oh, wait a second. None of the black folks are coming to the table. Why don't they want to hang out with us? We're all here talking about diversity. Isn't that like appealing? So obviously, I think I'll foreshadow the answer. This is based out of real relationships and friendships that you've worked towards, but it's also built out of work that the white folks in your organization have done internally, that you can have this kind of trust, right? So can you talk a little bit about what it takes to create a truly diverse organization and maintain it?
Briar has thoughts, and then I will offer mine.
A big thing is that we don't actually target having Black people or white people in the organization. And that started with the students, right? Because we, for a long time, had more students than teachers. So it's charging the kids who can pay and then giving instruments to the kids who can't. And that sends a message to the parents. Mm-hmm. So like monetarily, that's kind of how that works. The students who can afford to pay for a blues camp, who don't need a scholarship, don't necessarily get one. The reason why they do right now is because they had enough money for all of our students to have scholarships. But then like for our blues camp, that was like a big part of it. And so that's the same with our staff. We're not necessarily targeting people of color or white people. We're trying to, if we just send out that message, right, it's sort of the idea of manifesting, I guess, which is
it's also how you tell the story.
I know, but it's we project that, and then like in very specific ways, like, well, if two people are want to be a part of it for the same reason, then of course you give the job to the person who's more qualified, but also something that pays, something that puts into that is, what do they look like? And that is a really harsh reality, but that is also the reality of how people are treated in this country. And so to combat that, we kind of have to like meet it in the same way. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah.
I would also say, so we've already talked about the work that you have to do on yourself, right? You can't have the white folks just acting out. If I'm trying to touch black folks' hair all the time, then guess what? They're not going to come around. So,
all right. Step one. Got it. Don't touch black folks' hair.
Work on your stuff. Keep working on your stuff. Don't stop.
Yeah.
And make sure that the like now, like Face the Music became, as we had more people have joined and joined our leadership team as a result of Face the Music, black and white, who have come through that program. And so now we're like, oh, well, Face the Music is like an entry point. You go through Face the Music, and now we've kind of vetted you and educated you, so like you can be in a multi-ethnic space and not act a fool and not violate this culture that we've worked so hard to create. So those are two beginning steps, right?
Yeah.
And then when you tell the story of your organization, you make sure that you're highlighting everybody involved, but you also make sure that if it's like, who should we put on the poster, Briar or Joe? Does it make a difference? Well, yeah, I'm going to put Briar on the poster every time, not just because she's better looking, but because, that's who I'm trying.
If you thought I was going to argue with you at that point, you're wrong.
Yeah, come on, you're supposed to contradict me. No one's contradicting me. But it's like, duh, and it's not like we're not inviting the white kids. It's like, no, like the white folks who are cool with showing up will come. We don't have to invite the white people.
Right.
White people are dying, as we know, like they're craving being in multi-ethnic spaces. We don't
Right.
have to even encourage them. They're going to come. They want to be here. There's
Right.
a lot of them that do.
A lot of
Not all
times
of
it
them.
is our white students that have the instruments already, sort
Right.
of situation, right? So it's like
Yeah.
they've been playing music in there in our organization because they want to play something other than what their school is offering them, which is,
Mhm.
They have the
orchestra
backyard
music.
or the living room that we can use to host the thing, right?
Right.
And then you have more. The pot is stirred more. And then the other thing is not just making it about the music. How do we make it wider? So, well, okay, you don't have any music to bring to the table. How about you prepare a dish that reflects your cultural heritage? So the other thing that became clear as we did this was like, let's make it about heritage as well. And that's why the Rhapsody Project is a community that celebrates music and heritage through an anti-racist lens.
Mm.
Music, yes, music is key, but not just music. If you want to do it as a dancer, you want to participate as a chef, if you want to bring some other art form or cultural, basket weaving, we don't care. Like, bring it to the table. Like, let's learn about that. Oh, you do yo-yo. Oh, yo-yoing connects with your cultural heritage. Well, that's really cool. Like, let's share that. So that it's not
creating new heritage and traditions based off of that. Like
Mhm.
we want to delve in. We want to know about your past, but if you don't know about it, then what do you know about yourself? What do you know about? Because that's your heritage. That's your culture. And it doesn't have to go back, to a gravestone in England somewhere.
Yeah, and giving the students the incentive, like, hey, here's a list of questions. Go talk to the oldest person in your family and find out as much as you can about where you come from. Or they come back and they tell us that they're Creole. They tell us like they learn things that they never would have learned otherwise.
Yeah.
And so and then every student shares that. The kids with Italian heritage and the kids with a Creole background in Louisiana or whatever.
Which is so amazing, right? Because then now that we have this this foundation with these students that we've had for years, like we have created a culture with them that has allowed one of our students to feel comfortable enough to share his voice with us. Like, I didn't know that this kid could sing until we did this
camp in Oregon.
In Oregon. And then here he comes
and
with this
singing in Italian. And we're like, where did this come from?
What's
where it
up?
came from was like, we told him for 5 years, like, learn about your heritage, learn about your heritage, learn about your heritage. So now,
that's powerful. And underlying that, it sounds like what I hear here is being flexible in your thinking, being willing to let the project take you where it goes instead of having a preordained idea. It seems very clear that at the center of this is a staff that loves each other, that is working together in really deeply collaborative ways, and therefore the students come. They will come if you build something authentic and genuine. Being involved in the groups that I'm working with, the one in particular in family music called Family Music Forward, which is an interracial group, primarily Black and brown, and we started after George Floyd's murder. So it's been a year and a half of collaboration. I can say for myself and for our group that we have built that trust and that true kind of collaborative spirit, but it didn't happen overnight. It took months, and it took a lot of hard conversations, uncomfortable conversations often, and those parts of you that want to back away. Those are the moments when, because we stuck it out, because we were willing to have those conversations, we built the trust we needed to work as a team, which there's various things I would like to do here as we wrap up, but the first and most important is if folks are interested in learning more about the Rhapsody Project, which is based in Seattle, and those of you out on the Northwest can go experience things in person. There's a program coming up December 12th, the Big Blues Mix-Up, which sounds amazing. Next week.
A week from today, yeah.
My partner in crime here, Stacy, if you could throw these links in the chat, that would be great, so folks could find these. Yeah. But if you're not nearby, you can also sign up for the Face the Music program. Take this class that I just finished taking. I got to say, I went in somewhat hesitant, despite everything, thinking Sunday nights, do I want to jump in for an hour and a half conversation? It was wonderful, and it really built a community. And if you want to support the Rhapsody Project, you can go there. You can also donate tonight. So the way this program works, the Opening Doors Project, is that the anti-racism team at the Melrose UU Church pays artists directly a guarantee, but then we also collect money online, and that is central to this work. So if you can donate and help out Briar and Joe in their work, and they will share that money with the Rhapsody Project and split it. Let me do a little homework here. Coming up, next month's show, we had to cancel with Tom Prasada Rao and Leah. We will try to rearrange those. We had a scheduling issue. Our fingers are tightly crossed that it looks like we may have the great Dom Flemons joining us next month, which will be wonderful. Dom is from the Carolina Chocolate Drops. He is, I don't think it's too strong to say, a national treasure. So hopefully I'll be able to bring that to you in January. And then in February, I'll be joined by two good friends who are part of the Family Music Forward project that I am involved with called...
You like to look at them.
Wow.
Yeah, these guys are powerful. That's Saul Paul and Shine of Shine in the Moonbeams. And these guys talk about action, change in action. They're part of a program, a part of an album that was just nominated for Best Children's Grammy Award, called The One Tribe Collective is the name of the album. And this project was largely stewarded by members of our Family Music Forward group. Some of you know that last year there were 5 white nominees for the Children's Music Award, one of which was me. And a lot of stuff happened between then and now, a lot of various forms of pushing for change. The Family Music Forward group was instrumental in really talking with the Grammys about rearranging some of the ways that processes happened and getting new folks involved. There was a big drive to get new members of color specifically involved in the Academy for them to change some of their bar of entry. And the result this year, among other things, is that we had 5 nominees in the children's music category that are all majority acts of color, which is a major change from last year. It's a historical change in this category, and hopefully is a sign of things to come. That will continue to have better representation in that category. I think there was better representation this year too in some of the Americana and folk categories too. So this is progress. Again, this is people's bottom lines. You know, it's not just awards, it's income. So those changes matter. And what else? I think that's it. I would love for you guys, Briar and Joe, to take us out with a song.
Can do.
When you're done, I'll put up our credits and thank our producer. So thank you guys so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Joe, we've spent a bunch of time together. Briar, this is my first time meeting you, and it's wonderful getting to know you both.
Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Thanks for being here.
Alastair, it's been such a joy developing a friendship, and I can't wait to see how we can collaborate going forward. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and for those of you out there giving on our PayPal or Venmo, so that we can sustain this work and contribute more to working with our students. We really appreciate any help you can bring on that front is deeply appreciated. And we want to salute all the work that y'all are doing with Opening Doors and these wonderful organizations institutions that you're developing out there. So hope next time we do this, we can do it in person.
Yeah, for sure, man. All right.
Briar would like to sing for you one that we got from the Ink Spots, the wonderful Ink Spots. It's a waltz for you all.
Really quick. Sorry. How should we start it?
Be sure.
No. I mean, do you want me to start it on the?
Yeah.
to tell a lie. Millions of hearts have been broken just because these words were spoken. I love you, yes I do, I love you. If you break my heart, I'll die. So be sure that it's true when you sing I love you. It's a sin to tell a lie. Be sure it's true when you sing I love you. It's a sin to tell a lie. Millions of hearts have been broken just because these words were spoken. I love you, yes I do, I love you. If you break my heart, I'll die. So be sure that it's true when you sing I love you. It's a sin to tell a lie.
So good. This show is dedicated to my friend Scott Alaric, who we lost this week. One of the great keepers of the flame of folk music and great writers. We miss you, Scott. Thank you, Briar and Joe, for joining us. This has been Opening Doors, Race, Conversation, and Song. I hope you'll join us next month.